The vote to banish Earth was approved. Then humanity made its rules clear. The moment the count finished, I stopped breathing. 2,847 green lights, 12 white ones. Every green light was a species that had just decided my people no longer belonged in this galaxy. I was standing at the back of the conclave hall, alone, my diplomatic badge still warm from my palm. My name is Yara Osei. I was the last human being inside that room. The Voth Paramount, a tall creature with folded membrane wings and a voice like cracking stone, did not look at me when he read the result aloud. He did not need to. The number said everything. Resolution 7 Theta had passed. Earth and all her colony worlds were formally expelled from the Galactic Accord. Our communication frequencies would be blacklisted within 72 hours. Every trade route connecting us to the rest of the galaxy would be sealed. No species, under penalty of collective sanction, was permitted to render us aid. It took 11 seconds to count those lights. 11 seconds to decide the fate of 9 billion people. I had been an aide at the Galactic Conclave for 3 years. I had watched species argue over border strips and atmospheric rights and resource taxation. I had seen cold negotiations that lasted 40 hours without a single recess. I thought I understood how indifferent these chambers could feel. I was wrong. The indifference in that room, in those 11 seconds, was something I had never touched before. It was clean, almost mechanical, like pulling a weed from a garden, not because the weed had done anything terrible, but because it was simply growing in the wrong direction. Ambassador Chen had been escorted out an hour before the vote. She had filed our formal objection, 26 pages of legal argument, precedent citations, and 3 independent assessments from conclave-approved arbitrators. The chamber had received it. An administrative clerk had issued a receipt confirmation number. The objection had been noted in the record, and then the vote had proceeded exactly as scheduled. I had stayed because no one told me to leave. The chamber began to empty with the quiet efficiency of people who believed they had done something correct. Delegates stepped off their platforms and gathered in small clusters near the exit corridors. Some spoke in low tones. Most did not. A Keth delegate, one of the insect-limbed species from the outer relay systems, with compound eyes that caught every angle of light at once, paused beside me near the corridor entrance. He looked at my badge. He looked at my face. "Humans are very loud," he said, in the flat synthetic voice his translator produced. "Silence will suit you." He walked on without waiting for a reply. I stood there for another 3 seconds. Then I turned and walked in the opposite direction, toward the docking arm where the Hermes was berthed. The Hermes was our last ship still cleared for Conclave Station access. In 72 hours, that clearance would be revoked too. The corridor was long and pale and cold. My footsteps echoed. I counted them. It kept my mind from doing other things. I opened a channel to the Hermes on my wrist unit. Our captain, a quiet woman named Djokovic, answered on the first signal. "It passed," I said. A pause, not a long one. "How many?" 2,847. Another pause. Then, "Get to the ship. I'll prep departure." "I need 5 minutes." "You have 3. I stopped walking. I was alone in the corridor. Not a single other being in sight. I pressed my back against the cold wall and looked up at the ceiling. A massive curved thing of layered composite material, lit from within by soft bioluminescent panels, built by a species that had been part of the Accord for 400 years before Earth had even known the galaxy existed. 9 billion people. They were going to wake up tomorrow and learn that 3,000 alien species had voted them out of galactic civilization. I let that sit in my chest for exactly 5 seconds. Then I pushed off the wall and walked faster. The Hermes was a mid-range diplomatic courier, not a warship, not a freighter. It seated 40, carried 12 crew, and had been retrofitted with extra encryption arrays for conclave-level communications. Captain Djokovic was at the bridge when I boarded. She was a compact woman in her late 50s, with gray threaded through dark hair, and the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. She looked at me when I came through the hatch. "Sit down," she said, not unkindly. I sat. She did not offer condolences. She did not say anything for a long moment. She pulled up a navigational display and began adjusting something on the chart overlays. I glanced at the screen. The routes she was highlighting were not the routes we had used to get here. Those are conclave enforcement corridors, I said. I know what they are, she said. Why are you charting them? She didn't answer right away. She saved the chart to a secondary file, closed the display, and turned to face me fully for the first time. Because someone should know where they are, she said. I did not ask anything else. We departed the conclave station 11 minutes later, clearing the docking arm just as two Voth administrative vessels were moving into our former berth. The Hermes turned onto its transit heading, and the station fell behind us, vast and lit and indifferent, shrinking in the aft camera until it was just another bright point among the stars. I sent a single encrypted burst to Earth's relay network. The message contained 4 words. It passed, coming home. I sat in my berth that night and stared at the ceiling. I thought about how quiet the hall had been when the count finished. I thought about the Keth delegates' compound eyes. I thought about the 11 seconds. Somewhere behind us, 3,000 species were filing their session records, logging their votes, and moving on to whatever came next on their schedules. I closed my eyes. I thought, they do not know what they just did. Not because they made the wrong decision by their own logic, but because they made it as though we were already gone. As though the moment the count was read, we had simply ceased to matter. That, I thought, was the mistake, not the vote itself. The assumption that came with it. I was asleep before I could finish the thought. The transit home took 11 days. During those 11 days, Captain Djokovic updated her navigational charts every morning without comment. I watched her do it on the 3rd day, and on the 5th, and on the 9th. Each update was small. A route notation here, a corridor designation there, the kind of details that would mean nothing to someone who did not know what to look for, and everything to someone who did. I did not disturb her. I spent my time reviewing the session transcripts, the full record of the hearings that had led to Resolution 7 Theta, looking for anything I had missed. By the time we entered Sol System, I had read every page 4 times. I had found 3 things I had not noticed in the chamber. I wrote them down in a plain text document, encrypted it under my personal key, and saved it to the ship's local drive. Then I watched Earth come into view in the forward cameras, and for the first time in 11 days, I let myself feel something that was not the cold and careful weight of trying to understand. We came home to silence. That was the first thing I noticed. Earth's communication grid was active. I could see the traffic, the standard relay handshakes, the daily news cycling across the public frequencies. But from the government channels, from the diplomatic networks, from every official source that should have been flooded with emergency traffic, there was almost nothing. One statement, 17 words. I had received it on day 3 of the transit, and had read it so many times I had it memorized. We have received the conclave's decision. We are considering our response. 17 words. I had expected 40 pages of emergency protocols. I had expected crisis sessions and broadcast addresses, and the kind of urgent official noise that governments make when they are frightened. I got 17 words. I landed at the Geneva hub, cleared the arrival checks, and was met by a junior official from the diplomatic directorate, a young man named Philip, who handed me a temporary access badge and told me the Secretary General's office had requested a debrief at my earliest convenience. When was the statement issued? I asked him. 4 hours after your initial transmission, he said. Has there been anything since? No official statements, he said, but there has been some activity. What kind of activity? He glanced around the arrival corridor, not nervously, carefully. The kind that doesn't go in statements, he said. He did not elaborate. I did not push. I took the badge and went to find my debrief. The Secretary General was a tall woman named Adele Fontaine. She had held the position for 6 years and had the kind of calm that was not naturally grown but deliberately built, the way you build a wall, one careful layer at a time. She shook my hand when I entered, offered me coffee, and sat across from me without any of the urgency I had expected. Tell me about the chamber, she said. I told her everything. The vote, the count, the 11 seconds, the delegates filing out, the Keth delegates' parting words. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. 2,847, she said. Yes. And the 12 who voted against the resolution? The Sarin Collective, the Driftbound, and 10 of the smaller relay species. None of them have significant military or economic weight in the accord. She nodded slowly. But they voted with us. They voted against the expulsion. I don't know if that's the same thing. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled, very briefly, very slightly. It might become the same thing, she said. She asked me 3 more questions, about the legal filing, about the arbitration receipt, about whether the formal objection had been entered into the permanent session record. I answered all 3. Then she thanked me, told me I had done well, and stood up. I stood too. "What are we going to do?" I asked. She looked at me with the same careful calm she had worn the whole meeting. "We are going to be very quiet," she said, "for a little while longer." I left her office and walked out into the Geneva afternoon. The sky was gray, and the air smelled like rain coming. People moved past me on the walkways, ordinary people, going ordinary places, doing the things people do on a Tuesday. None of them looked afraid. None of them looked angry. They looked like people who hadn't heard yet, or people who had heard, and were continuing anyway. I stopped at the edge of the walkway and looked up at the sky. Out there, past the clouds, past the orbit of our own satellites, past the markers of our solar system's edge, 3,000 species were going about their lives, confident that they had resolved a problem. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking. 30 days. The Secretary General had said quiet for a little while longer. I would find out what that meant. The 30 days were unlike anything I had experienced in 3 years of diplomatic work. Nothing public happened. No emergency broadcasts, no military announcements, no calls for unity or resistance, or any of the things governments usually reach for when they are scared. Earth was simply quiet in a way that felt purposeful, the way a person is quiet when they are thinking, rather than when they have run out of things to say. I was reassigned to an internal review team, 5 people, a small conference room, and access to a specific set of files that I had not known existed. The team's task was officially described as post-resolution assessment. In practice, we were reading everything we could find about the Galactic Accord's enforcement structure, its legal history, its jurisdictional limits, and, most interestingly, its founding documents. That was where we found the clause. It was buried in Appendix 7 of the original Accord Charter, in a subsection that had not been cited in any session record in over 200 years. The language was technical and dense, the kind of text that had clearly been inserted by a legal team with very specific concerns, and then quietly forgotten by everyone except the drafters. The subsection stated, in plain terms, that any signatory species formally expelled from the Accord was thereby released from all treaty obligations it had assumed upon joining, including, and this was the part that made the whole room go quiet when our analyst, a careful man named Gareth, read it aloud, including the Pact of Mutual Diminishment. The Pact of Mutual Diminishment was the agreement that had been cited as one of humanity's violations, the arms research, the terraforming, the things we were supposedly doing wrong. If we were no longer bound by the pact, we were not doing anything wrong. We had been expelled for breaking rules that the expulsion itself had dissolved. Gareth set down the document and looked around the table. "How long have we known about this?" he asked. No one answered. He looked at me. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think some people have known for a while." He nodded slowly. He picked up his pen and circled the subsection number. "Good," he said, very quietly. Outside that room, other things were happening that I was only hearing about in pieces. The arms research programs that the conclave had objected to did not stop. They were reorganized. New directorate names, new funding structures. Everything was continuing, just under different official headings. The work was moving faster, not slower. I learned this from Philip, the junior official who had met me at the landing bay, who had a habit of saying informative things in casual ways when we passed in the hallways. I also learned, through the same informal channel, that packages were going out. Not physical packages, data packages, medical synthesis protocols, cold fusion efficiency models, updated cryptographic designs, all sent without announcement, without signatures, without any identifying marks connecting them to Earth's government. They were simply appearing in the databases of the 12 species who had voted against Resolution 7 Theta. No strings, no requests, no instructions on how to use them. Just gifts. I thought about that a lot during those 30 days. The conclave's rules said that no species could render aid to humanity. There was no rule that said humanity could not give things away. There was no rule against generosity. On day 19, I received a formal communication from the conclave's administrative bureau. A reminder notice, automatically generated, informing Earth of the terms of the trade blockade and the consequences of violations. It was the kind of document that expected a response, a confirmation of receipt, an acknowledgement of terms, perhaps a petition for modified conditions. We sent back an automated receipt acknowledgement, nothing more. I was in the monitoring room when our communications team logged the response. The senior operator, a woman named Claire, watched the outgoing signal confirm, and then leaned back in her chair. "They're going to want more than that," she said. "I know," I said, "and we're giving them nothing. We're giving them exactly what they asked for," I said, "a receipt confirmation." Claire looked at me sideways. Then she smiled, just a little, and turned back to her console. On day 23, I finally got a look at what Captain Djokovic had been doing with those navigational charts during our transit home. She had been one of 14 specialists quietly assembled in the Deep Space Routing Division. Their task, I was told by Gareth, who seemed to know a surprising amount about a surprising number of things, was to map the jump lane geometry of the conclave's existing trade corridors and identify the gaps, the places where the lanes bent around dead zones or gravitational anomalies, the places where, with updated stellar cartography, you could chart a different path entirely. In 23 days, they had found 14 such paths. Routes that the conclave's charts did not list, because the conclave's charts had not been comprehensively updated in 60 years. Routes that were not human-controlled but were simply there. Geography, not politics. Open to anyone who knew where to look. Djokovic had known something like this was coming. I understood, at last, why she had been updating those charts every morning on the Hermes. She had been preparing. Not because anyone ordered her to, because she was the kind of person who, when told she could no longer use the front door, immediately started looking for windows. On day 30, I was called back to Adele Fontaine's office. She was standing when I arrived, which she hadn't been before. She was looking out the window at the sky. "Tomorrow," she said, without turning around, "we speak." "What do we say?" I asked. She turned then, and she had the same careful calm, but underneath it, I thought I could see something else. Not excitement, something quieter than that. Something that felt like a decision that had been made slowly and completely, the way water cuts through stone. "We say what is true," she said, simply, clearly, and without asking anyone's permission. I did not sleep that night. On day 31, the transmission went out. It was a tight beam broadcast aimed at every conclave registered frequency simultaneously, using a deep space array that Earth had built over 11 years in a remote orbit beyond Neptune. The conclave knew the array existed. They had noted it in our last review cycle. They had not objected because, at the time, it had not been pointed at anything. Now it was. I watched the broadcast from a monitoring room in Geneva. There were 7 of us in that room. Nobody spoke during the transmission. Nobody needed to. The broadcast did not open with the Secretary General. It did not open with a general, or an admiral, or a diplomat. It opened with a 12-year-old girl named Olive, from Lagos, who had wanted to study alien plant biology ever since she was 8 years old, and had read about the oxygen-cycling forests of the Saran homeworld in a school library book. She sat in front of the camera in a plain white room, and spoke in a clear, steady voice that did not shake once. "My name is Olive. I am 12 years old. I live on Earth. I was told that I am not welcome in your galaxy. I want you to understand what that means, and what it does not mean." I watched the intercept feeds from conclave stations on the screen to my left. Signal flags were already appearing. The transmission was being received, logged, distributed. Olive continued. "It means that the people who took a vote have decided something. It does not mean the thing they decided is true." She paused for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for the words to land. Then the broadcast shifted. A voice, Adele Fontaine's voice, steady and unhurried, began reading what would become known, over the following weeks, as the 4 rules. Not demands, not threats. Rules. The broadcast did not describe them that way. It did not use that word at all. It simply stated them, one after another, with the plainness of someone describing the weather. The first rule: humanity would not leave. This was not a declaration of defiance. It was stated as simple fact. Earth and her colony worlds were located where they were located. The people living in them had been born there, had grown up there, would continue to live there. The vote of the Galactic Accord did not move a single rock or redirect a single orbit. We were here because we were here, and no resolution changed geography. On the intercept feed, the signal flags were multiplying. The second rule: the trade blockade would not function as intended. This rule came with an attachment: 14 navigational designations, formatted in the standard conclave routing code, representing 14 jump lane paths that the conclave's charts did not list. The transmission noted, without commentary, that these paths were not human-controlled. They were not secret. They were simply accurate, in ways that 60-year-old charts were not. Any species wishing to use them was free to do so. One of the operators in the monitoring room inhaled sharply. I kept watching. The third rule: the 12 species who had voted against Resolution 7 Theta were formally invited into what the broadcast called a voluntary exchange network. The name was deliberate. It was not an alliance. It was not a counter-organization to the conclave. It was simply a statement that humanity was prepared to share things, freely, with anyone who wished to receive them, with no attached obligation and no strings. The fourth rule was the one that made the intercept feeds go frantic. It stated the terms under which humanity was prepared to re-engage with the Galactic Conclave in dialogue. Not the terms under which we wanted to rejoin the Accord. Not the conditions of a petition. The conditions under which we would agree to further conversation at all. The difference was not subtle. A petition says, "We want back in, and here is what we will do to earn that." What the broadcast said was, "If you want to talk, these are the terms of the conversation." It was not aggressive. The language was polite, even warm in places. But the structure of it, who was setting the terms, who was responding to whom, had flipped entirely from every prior interaction between Earth and the conclave. We were not asking. We were offering. The intercept feed on my left showed the signal reaching major conclave relay stations within 4 minutes of transmission start. By minute 6, automated monitoring systems at 12 different stations had flagged the broadcast for priority review. By minute 8, the first live response signals were appearing. Not official communications, just the kind of internal traffic that monitoring systems generate when something unexpected happens and people start talking to each other about it. Claire, sitting beside me, pointed at a specific readout. "That's a Keth priority signal," she said. I looked at it. The signal was originating from the Keth delegation's private communication hub, not their official diplomatic channel, their internal channel. "They're not filing a formal response," I said. "They're just talking to each other." "Loudly," Claire said. I almost smiled. The broadcast ran for 22 minutes. When it ended, the deep space array went silent. No follow-up, no invitation for reply, no open channel left waiting. The statement had been made. It would land where it landed. I stepped out of the monitoring room into the corridor and stood there for a moment, with my back against the wall, the same way I had stood in the conclave's corridor 11 days earlier. But this time the wall was warm. This time there were other people in the hallway, staff moving past, a group of 3 arguing about something in low voices, a young woman carrying 2 cups of coffee who caught my eye and nodded. This time I was not alone. Gareth found me there 2 minutes later. He was holding a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who had just confirmed something he had already suspected. "The Keth biometric readout is spiking," he said. "I've been monitoring their delegates' physiological data through the diplomatic health-sharing protocols. A Keth biometric spike is, apparently, their equivalent of a very loud intake of breath." "In 11 years of working at the conclave," I said, "I have never seen a Keth spike." "No," he said. "Most people haven't." He looked at his tablet. I looked at the ceiling. "Do you think they'll respond?" he asked. "Yes," I said, but not the way they planned to. He nodded and walked on. I went back into the monitoring room and sat down in my chair. On the intercept feed, the signals kept coming. I watched them for a long time. What happened in the days after the broadcast was not a crisis, though I think many people expected it to be. The conclave did not respond immediately. That was the first surprise. I had expected a swift formal communication, an official condemnation, a declaration that Resolution 7 Theta remained in effect, a procedural statement of some kind. Instead, there was silence from the official channels, the same kind of quiet that Earth had practiced for 30 days. But in the conclave's case, it did not feel purposeful. It felt like the silence of an organization that had not yet decided what to say. In the absence of official response, the things that actually mattered were happening elsewhere. The 14 new jump lane routes in the broadcast attachment were verified by 3 independent navigation teams within 48 hours of transmission. The Sarin Collective, one of the 12 friendly vote species, was the first to publish a confirmed transit using one of the new paths. They did so without announcement. Their cargo vessel simply logged the route as its return transit from a mineral survey, filed the navigational data in the standard format, and went home. The route was now in the public record. The conclave could not retroactively seal a route that a non-human species had already used, documented, and filed. 2 days later, a second species, the driftbound, who had also voted against the resolution, used a different route from the 14, then a third species, then 2 more. None of them were Earth ships. None of them were technically doing anything the conclave could object to. They were just using accurate maps to get from one place to another. I was watching this unfold from the review team's conference room when Gareth set a document on the table in front of me. "The enforcement report," he said. I picked it up. The conclave had dispatched enforcement vessels to the 14 new routes within 3 days of the broadcast. This was expected. What the report showed, and what had clearly not been expected, was what the enforcement vessels found when they arrived at the designated coordinates. Nothing that could be stopped. The routes were not human-controlled. Earth had no ships at those coordinates, no outposts, no infrastructure. The routes were just routes, geometric paths through space, open to any vessel with accurate cartography. To seal them, the conclave would need to station enforcement ships at every viable transit point indefinitely. A calculation done in the review team's back room suggested that properly sealing all 14 routes would require redirecting approximately 32% of the conclave's active enforcement fleet away from their existing duties for an indefinite period. The review team's analyst, a quiet man named Owen, had written 3 words in the margin of his calculation sheet: "Not worth it." I thought he was probably right. The exchange network was growing faster than anyone had publicly predicted. By day 12 after the broadcast, 9 of the 12 friendly vote species had accepted some form of connection to the network. Not all of them had taken everything on offer. Some had accepted only the medical synthesis data. Some had taken only the navigational information. The Sarin Collective had quietly requested the full package and had asked no questions about where it came from. None of them announced their participation. They did not need to. The conclave's intelligence division would eventually piece it together, and when they did, they would find that nothing that had happened violated any rule the conclave had the standing to enforce. Humanity was not a member of the Accord anymore. The Accord's rules did not bind us. The receiving species were members, but no Accord rule prohibited a member species from accepting a gift. There were no rules against gratitude. On day 15, the conclave emergency session was called. I did not attend, obviously. We were not members. But Claire's intercept monitoring pulled in enough signal traffic from the session to build a reasonably complete picture of what had happened inside. The first thing that had happened was the enforcement report. Specifically, the part about the 14 routes. The Keth delegate, the same one who had told me silence would suit us, had presented a secondary analysis showing that the routes had not been newly created. They had existed all along. Earth's cartographers had simply found them because, as the analysis noted with what I imagined was considerable discomfort, Earth had been quietly commissioning the most comprehensive updated stellar survey of the inner and outer relay corridors for the past 4 years. The survey had not been secret. It had been registered with the standard scientific disclosure protocols. It had simply not been noticed, because no one had thought to wonder what it was for. The second thing that had happened in the session was the legal analysis. The Accord's own legal division, not Earth's, not ours, the Conclave's internal team, had reviewed the broadcast and identified the reference to Appendix 7. It had taken them 2 days. Gareth had found it in one afternoon with 5 people, and some good coffee, but I chose not to mention that. The legal division's report, as Claire read it to me from the Intercept summary, confirmed that the subsection was valid, had never been repealed, and meant exactly what it said. Any species expelled from the Accord was released from all treaty obligations assumed upon joining, including the Pact of Mutual Diminishment. The report noted, with what I imagined was also considerable discomfort, that this meant the violations cited in the original expulsion resolution were no longer violations, because the expelled party was no longer bound by the rules being violated. This did not mean the expulsion was reversed. It meant the expulsion had deleted its own justification. The third thing from the session was the briefing about the exchange network's growth rate. 9 species in 15 days, with 2 more expected within the week. The Conclave's economic modeling team had run projections on what the network would look like in 6 months if the current rate continued. The projection was, by all accounts, not comfortable reading. Owen had been running similar numbers in our review room. He showed me his version one afternoon. A quiet, careful spreadsheet with very simple math. He did not say anything dramatic about it. He just pointed at the 6-month column and shrugged. "They're going to want to talk," he said. "I know," I said. "When? When they've run out of things to try first." He nodded and went back to his numbers. The formal communication from the Conclave arrived on day 33 after the broadcast, 2 days after the emergency session. It came through the exchange network. That detail was not accidental. The Conclave had its own communication channels, official diplomatic frequencies, encrypted government bands, all the formal infrastructure of a 3,000-species governing body. They could have sent a message on any of those channels. Instead, they used the voluntary exchange network that humanity had built in 30 days to reach the 12 friendly vote species. To contact us, they had to use our infrastructure. The message itself was 3 paragraphs long, formal language, carefully hedged, full of the kind of diplomatic phrasing that means several things at once, without committing to any of them. But the core of it was simple. The Galactic Conclave was prepared to open a dialogue regarding the current situation, and requested that Earth designate a representative to attend a preliminary meeting. It did not say negotiation. It did not say petition. It said dialogue. Someone in the Conclave's communications office had chosen that word carefully. I gave them credit for it. Adele Fontaine summoned me the next morning. I had expected a larger meeting, an advisory group, a strategy session, a room full of people planning how to respond. Instead, it was just the 2 of us, in her office, with the rain coming down outside the window again. She handed me the message. I read it, though I had already seen it through Claire's monitoring feed. "You're sending me," I said. It wasn't a question. "You were the last person in the room when the vote was read," she said. "You heard what they said when they thought it was over. I want them to see your face when they realize it isn't." I looked at the message again. "They want to meet on the Conclave station," I said. "I know. We're not meeting on the Conclave station." She smiled, properly this time, and it was the realest expression I had seen from her in all the weeks since the vote. "No," she said, "we're not." The counter-proposal we sent was brief, 1 paragraph. It accepted the dialogue, confirmed my designation as Earth's representative, and named the meeting location as a converted asteroid mining platform in Jupiter's outer orbital band, a facility that Earth had been quietly upgrading for the past 3 years, for purposes that had not been publicly specified. We would be meeting in our gravity, on our ground. The Conclave Paramount objected. The objection came within 6 hours, through the same exchange network channel they had used before. The Conclave's position was that neutral ground should be chosen, specifically one of the 3 established neutral stations that the Accord used for sensitive negotiations. Our response was sent in under an hour. I drafted it myself. Claire read it and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Short." "It should be," I said. The message read, "Our previous meeting was held in your gravity, at your station, on your schedule. We found that instructive. We believe you will too. Our location stands. We will expect your delegation in 14 days. 14 days. On the day I departed for the platform, Gareth gave me a small printed card, handwritten, which was unusual for him. It had 4 lines on it, one for each of the broadcast rules, in case I needed to remember them in the room. I put it in my jacket pocket. On the shuttle up from Geneva, I looked out the window at the sky brightening into the thin blue of high atmosphere, and then at the darkness beyond it, and then at the stars. Out there, 3,000 species were watching. I thought about Olive from Lagos, who wanted to study alien plants, sitting in front of a camera and saying the truest thing anyone had said in a very long time. It does not mean the thing they decided is true. The platform came into view as we cleared Jupiter's shadow, a structure of dark metal and lit windows, angular and practical and very human-looking, orbiting in the silence above the gas giant's swirling surface. I watched it grow larger. I thought about Captain Djokovic, updating her navigational charts every morning on the Hermes, not because anyone had ordered her to, just because she was the kind of person who started looking for windows. I thought about Owen's 6-month projection, sitting quietly in a spreadsheet in a small conference room in Geneva. I thought about 30 days of silence that had turned out to be 30 days of building. The shuttle docked. I picked up my case and walked through the hatch. The platform's main conference room was a wide, clean space, with large viewports looking out at Jupiter. The planet filled the lower half of the view completely, a vast field of amber and brown and white, slowly turning, indifferent to everything happening in its orbit. It was exactly the right view to have at your back when you walked into a room and needed to remind yourself how large the universe was and how small any particular decision in it was, even the ones that felt enormous. I arrived first and arranged the room myself. 14 chairs, 12 for the conclave delegation, 1 for each of the major species groups who had confirmed attendance, 2 chairs at the head of the table, 1 for me, 1 empty one, which I had placed at my right. The chairs were all exactly the same height. This was not something the conclave had needed to be told. It was simply something I had decided. In every formal conclave session I had attended in 3 years as an aide, the presiding body sat on a raised platform, higher chairs, literally elevated, literally looking down at whoever was presenting, petitioning, reporting, or objecting. The design was old and probably not intended as a psychological tool, but it worked as one. These chairs were all the same. The conclave delegation arrived in 4 groups, over the course of 30 minutes. The Keth came first, 6 of them, their compound eyes cataloging every detail of the room in the first 3 seconds. Then the Voth, then the Sarin Collective's representatives, then the remaining species in pairs. They looked at the chairs. They sat down. Nobody said anything about the height. The Keth paramount, not the same delegate who had spoken to me in the corridor after the vote, but a senior figure I recognized from the formal session records, took the seat directly across from mine. He was a larger specimen than most, his articulated limbs folded precisely, his translator unit updated to a model I hadn't seen before. He waited until the room was fully seated. Then he looked at me. "We asked," he said, "in our initial communication, for dialogue regarding the current situation." "You did," I said. "It is the conclave's position that Resolution 7 Theta remains in effect." "I understand that is the conclave's position," I said. "We are prepared to discuss a conditional pathway that could, over time, address the circumstances under which Earth and her colonies might reapply for membership consideration." He said the word reapply with great care. It was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and he knew it. I looked at him for a moment. Not coldly, not aggressively. I just looked at him the way you look at someone when you are about to say something that is going to change the shape of the conversation. "That is not what we're here to discuss," I said. The room was very quiet. The broadcast was clear, I continued. "We are not petitioning for reinstatement. We are not here to discuss conditions under which humanity might reapply. We are here because you contacted us, through our network, requesting dialogue. And we agreed to it, which means we set the terms." The Keth Paramount's translator unit made a small sound, not a word, just a sound. "The current situation," I said, is not that Earth needs to find its way back into the Accord. The current situation is that the Accord needs to decide how it wants to relate to a species that is already here, already building, and not going anywhere. Those are different problems, and they require different conversations. Across the table, one of the Voth delegates shifted slightly. I thought of Gareth's card in my pocket. I did not take it out. I did not need to. Rule 1, I said, is that we will not leave. This is not negotiable, and it is not a threat. It is simply true. We were not asked permission to exist in this galaxy. We are simply here, as we have always been, as we will continue to be. I paused. Would you like to hear the rest? The Keth Paramount looked at me for a long time. His compound eyes were unreadable, the way they had been in the conclave corridor when his delegate had told me silence would suit us. Then he folded his upper limbs into a posture I had not seen in 3 years of conclave sessions. Gareth, who had briefed me on Keth body language before I departed, had shown me that posture in a diagram. He had labeled it with a single word: listening. The Keth Paramount was listening. I took a breath and continued. Outside the viewports, Jupiter turned slowly in the dark, vast, indifferent, and magnificently unconcerned with any of this. But I was not unconcerned. I was the most concerned I had ever been, in the best possible way, because this time, I was not standing at the back of a room watching someone else count lights. This time, I was at the table, our table, and the conversation was just beginning. The exchange network now included 11 of the 12 friendly vote species. 2 more were in preliminary contact. The 14 navigational routes were in the public record and being actively used. The research programs that the conclave had called violations were continuing under new designations. The legal division of the Accord had confirmed, in their own documents, that humanity was no longer bound by the rules we had allegedly broken. The conclave had expelled us to make us smaller. Instead, they had handed us the one thing we had never quite had before: permission to stop asking permission. I looked at the Keth Paramount across the table and thought about a 12-year-old in Lagos who wanted to study alien plants, about a captain who updated her charts every morning, about a quiet man running numbers in a small conference room, about 17 words that had somehow contained more strategy than anything I had seen in 3 years of formal diplomacy. I thought about 30 days of silence that was actually 30 days of building. The second rule, I said, is about roots. And I began to talk. Outside, Jupiter kept turning. The stars were there, the same stars they had always been, and Earth was one of the bright points among them, not banished, not diminished, not gone, just beginning.